Hello, this is episode 27 of this True Crime Nightmare podcast. This is the case of Joanna Dennehy, who murdered 3 men and attempted to murder another 2. The murders all took place over a very short space of time during March of 2013. It all came to light after a dog walker discovered a body of a man in a ditch near Newborough, which is in the Peterborough district of Cambridgeshire in England. The body was dressed in a black sequined dress. No attempt had been made to hide the man's body. He had just been literally dumped there. A man had been reported missing just the day before from the local area. The missing person was called Kevin Lee, who was 48 years old at the time. The body was indeed identified as Kevin Lee. He had been stabbed multiple times before being dumped in a ditch. The body had been discovered face down in the ditch, and it looked to have been staged, with the victim's bare bottom pointing upwards. Kevin Lee had been discovered wearing a black dress, which his wife was unsure as to why he would be wearing it. He was not known to dress in women's clothes at all. The police who were investigating the murder felt that the way the body had been left was to add to the shock value, as well as having possible ritualistic reasons for doing so by the killer. Kevin Lee's body had been found on the 30th of March 2013. He had been killed the day before. Despite no identification or wallet found at the scene, the body was very quickly identified, which would go on to help track the killer. Kevin Lee had been 48 years old at the time of his death. He was married and had 2 children. He worked as a property developer and owned a number of properties in the Peterborough area. Joanna Dennehy became a person of interest in Kevin Lee's murder very early on in the police investigation due to Joanna knowing the victim. She was in fact having an affair with him, as well as living in one of his properties. The motive, however, was unknown. It was also felt by the police that she would have needed some sort of accomplice to help move Kevin Lee's body to the dump site later on. The police quickly discovered that she was on friendly terms with a man called Gary Stretch. Gary Stretch was extremely tall, about 7 foot, it's been reported. He was also familiar with the local area. It was also said by police who knew both Gary Stretch and Joanna Dennehy that he was always trying to please her and that she basically used him. The police soon discovered that Joanna Dennehy was renovating a property of Kevin Lee's. They searched the property and found some blood spatter. When the results came back, it was found that the blood was, in fact, a mixture of 2 people's DNA. One of the person's DNA was Kevin Lee's, and the other was a Polish man called Lucas. Joanna was also known to have been having some sort of relationship with Lucas. The investigators working on the case soon found out that Joanna Dennehy had killed Lucas as well as Kevin Lee. Another man who was known to Joanna was also missing. Although not reported missing, the police just could not find him. The man was called John Chapman, and he was a housemate of Joanna's previously. The police found both men's bodies on the 3rd of April of 2013 near Thorney, which is about 8 miles from Peterborough. Peterborough was where not only Joanna Dennehy lived, but also all 3 of her victims had lived. Both men had been stabbed multiple times, just like the first victim, Kevin Lee. The investigation was over really quickly. All leads were linked to Joanna Dennehy, and Gary Stretch was also implicated as well. The police discovered that the first victim was in fact Lucas. Joanna had arranged by text to meet him. She had already decided to kill him and had made plans. She ended up stabbing Lucas many times. She obviously left evidence behind in the property where she had carried out the murder, because the police would discover Lucas's body later. Gary Stretch helped Joanna to put the body in a wheelie bin where it stayed for a few days. Gary Stretch again helped move Lucas's body to his eventual dump site where he would soon be discovered by the police. John Chapman was Joanna's next victim. They had shared a property together at one time, but they did not actually like each other according to people who knew them. Joanna had wanted to evict John Chapman from the shared property due to his heavy drinking. He did move out eventually. He found himself a bedsit to live in instead. For some reason, Joanna Dennehy decided to kill John Chapman. She stabbed him multiple times and again, with help from Gary Stretch, dumped his body in the ditch where it was soon discovered. Joanna killed John Chapman 10 days after she had killed her first victim, Lucas. Her final murder victim was Kevin Lee, who was the first to be discovered. It was thought that Joanna had lured Kevin, who she had been in some sort of relationship with, to a flat. It was unclear if he had put on the black dress himself or if someone else had dressed him in it for some reason. Joanna had already decided to kill Kevin Lee. She stabbed him multiple times, and once again, with help from Gary Stretch, they moved the body to the dump site where it would be discovered the following day by the dog walker. By the time Kevin's body had been found, Joanna Dennehy and Gary Stretch had already gone on the run. The pair ended up in Hereford. Hereford is about 150 miles away from Peterborough, where all of the murders had just recently taken place. She had left 3 men murdered. She was, however, not quite finished. She had, at random, attempted to murder 2 more victims, both separately. Luckily, both men survived her attacks. The first man was called Robin, who was out in Hereford walking his dog. Joanna engaged Robin in a conversation before suddenly stabbing him many times. He put up a fight and managed to defend himself. Joanna thought that she had killed Robin and left the scene. Just 10 minutes later, she chose another victim. Along the way, Joanna and Gary had picked up a friend of theirs called Mark Lloyd. Mark Lloyd was unaware of what had been going on and did not take part in any of the killings or help in any way to dispose of bodies or of any evidence. The second attempted murder was on a victim called John Rodgers, who was also out walking his dog in Hereford. John Rodgers was 56 years old at the time of the vicious, unprovoked attack. Joanna Dennehy struck up a conversation with John, just like she had with Robin, and without any warning she started to stab him. It was described later as a frenzied attack that only lasted a few minutes. Luckily, although she thought she had killed him, John survived the violent attack on him. Gary Stretch is said to have seemed unfazed by what had just taken place, but the unsuspecting fellow passenger, Mark Lloyd, was shocked by what he had just witnessed. At this point, the police were on their tracks, and within a short amount of time, they had Joanna Dennehy surrounded. She was arrested without incident. Both men were with her, namely Gary Stretch and Mark Lloyd, were also arrested at this point. It was reported that Joanna Dennehy did not seem to understand the seriousness of the crimes that she was accused of. She was laughing and joking with the police. Joanna pleaded guilty in November of 2013 to all 3 murders and also to the 2 attempted murders. 2 men also stood trial in relation to the murders, Gary Stretch and another man who had come to light afterwards. His name was Leslie Layton. Gary had been 47 years old at the time and Leslie had been 36 years old. Both men decided not to give evidence or face cross-examination. On the 28th of February of 2014, Joanna Dennehy, who was 32 years old at the time, was sentenced to life imprisonment. The trial judge, Mr. Justice Spencer, went on to recommend that she should never be released. Joanna Dennehy did go on to receive a whole life tariff. She is believed to be only one of 3 women in the UK to have ever been given a whole life tariff, which can only be given to prisoners by a Home Secretary. The other 2 female prisoners were Rose West and Myra Hindley. Gary Stretch was also sentenced to life imprisonment, but with a recommended minimum tariff of 19 years. Leslie Layton was sentenced to a total of 14 years in prison. All 3 had stood trial at the Old Bailey in London, which is often used for the most serious offenders. Joanna Dennehy was born in August of 1982 in St Albans, Herefordshire, and grew up in nearby Harpenden. Joanna grew up with both parents and a sister. She was said to have had a privileged childhood in many ways. The family were quite well off and treated their daughters well. Joanna had a few hobbies over the years as she was growing up, which included horse riding. She initially did well at school. However, shortly into her teenage years, it had been reported since that her behaviour changed. Joanna started to go off the rails. She began drinking heavily and was even caught taking one of her exams in a drunken state. Joanna had her first child at the age of 17, but alcohol was too important to her, so she did not look after the child. She was known to be very controlling in all of her relationships, and she was also known to display violent tendencies at times. Joanna was even sectioned at one point due to her erratic behaviour and her violent outbursts. She had scared her partner with her shocking outbursts and her obsession with knives. She also served a short prison sentence due to her violent behaviour. She did eventually manage to find work. She worked as a rent collector for a time. Joanna Dennehy had been known to self-harm from a very early age. She would often cut herself. She had told professionals who wanted to treat her that she did not feel any emotions. She was thought to have been suffering from a personality disorder at the time. She went on to have another baby, but once again didn't look after the child. Joanna often posed with knives, and there are many pretty scary photos of her online showing her with very large knives. She had apparently told Mark Lloyd that she had wanted to be famous like Bonnie and Clyde, and that she eventually wanted to kill 9 men. She only wanted men as victims and said that she had got a taste for killing after she had killed her first victim. In the aftermath of the murder trial, it emerged that the probation service were meant to be supervising Joanna Dennehy at the time of the murders. She had previously been convicted of assault and had also owned a dangerous dog. The subsequent report concluded that the staff that had been dealing with Joanna in the probation service at the time were too inexperienced to help. Joanna Dennehy is serving her whole life tariff at Low Newton in Durham. She is also said to be dating a fellow female murderer. Some experts have said that they believe Joanna Dennehy craved notoriety and that she had also wanted to humiliate her victims. Joanna Dennehy's murder victims were all found pretty quickly. No real attempt had been made to conceal their bodies other than to move them from the original crime scenes. All of her victims had been stabbed multiple times. Kevin Lees was known to have been in a relationship with his killer, despite being married and a father of 2 children. It is not known if Kevin's wife had been aware of the relationship beforehand, but it must have been such a shock to not only find out that your husband had been brutally murdered, but that he had also been in a close relationship with the killer. Lucas, the Polish national, was known to be infatuated with Joanna, and it is said that she used him multiple times, just as she did most people, especially men, in her life. Joanna herself has gone on to say that she did not have feelings for anyone and just wanted to kill men. She even called it, quote, her fun, unquote, when describing the murders. Joanna Dennehy's sister Maria said later that she was not surprised by the guilty plea from Joanna because she felt that she did it in order that she could control the situation. Joanna was at first in Bronzefield prison before being moved. The psychiatrist there diagnosed Joanna Dennehy after assessing her with psychopathic, antisocial and borderline personality disorders. The killer had certainly been able to manipulate some of the men who had come into her life, it would seem. She clearly needed help to dispense the bodies. She herself was not particularly big and needed help. Gary Stretch fitted the bill perfectly and appeared more than happy to help out. He could have stopped her after the first murder if he had wanted to, but for whatever reason he decided to help out instead. Joanna's family, as well as the victims' families, must all be devastated by what has happened. At least she was caught quickly and is now in prison for life without any possibility of parole in the future. Her victims probably did not have time to react to what was happening and were in all likelihood taken by surprise by someone they knew and personally trusted, presumably. The many photos of her smiling whilst holding very large bladed knives leave a lasting impression if you look them up. There were many chances missed, in my opinion, to either lock her up or to treat her. It was already known that she was a dangerous person and that she had a fascination with knives from a very early age. But unfortunately, she was left free to carry out 3 brutal murders and to attempt to kill another 2 men who luckily survived. Credits for this episode go to Wikipedia, www.thesun.co.uk, www.mirror.co.uk, and also the Born to Kill documentary, which you can see on YouTube. Thank you very much for listening.